At 4:18 a.m. local time, 12 Ukrainian AN-196 Lyutyi strike drones were racing across Russian territory at nearly 180 kilometers per hour. Ahead of them stood Alabuga, the largest center of Geran 2 production in Russia. But reaching the factory was only half the race. Within hours, trucks were expected to begin moving newly completed Geran 2 drones, engines, and guidance components out of the complex. Once those vehicles departed, one concentrated target would scatter across storage sites, launch bases, and military routes throughout Russia. Ukraine still had one target. Soon, it would have hundreds. That was why the strike had to arrive before Alabuga began releasing its next batch. Russian radar crews were already searching for the drones. S-400 batteries prepared to engage. Panzer S-1 crews shifted toward the expected approach routes. Pol-21 systems began filling the air with interference. Russia had detected the attack. That was not the same as understanding it. Because the 12 Lyutyi drones were only the part of the operation Russia could see. The 12 Lyutyi drones had crossed deep into Russian territory without triggering the response Ukraine expected. That did not mean they were unseen. It meant Russia had not yet decided what it was looking at. Scattered contacts appeared over the Volga region, vanished, then returned farther east. Some remained visible for only a few seconds. Others resembled weather clutter, civilian traffic, or unrelated aerial activity. The formation continued toward Tatarstan. Alabuga was still more than 300 kilometers ahead. Inside the industrial complex, the next Geran 2 shipment was already beginning to take shape. Near the outbound loading area, KAMAZ trucks were being positioned beside rows of completed Geran 2 drones awaiting shipment. Nearby, engines, guidance units, and unfinished airframes were being prepared for separate transfers. Once the first vehicles cleared the gates, one concentrated target would begin dividing across several routes. Ukraine was now raising two clocks. The first was inside Alabuga. Each Geran moved toward the loading area increased what Ukraine could destroy in one strike. Every truck moved toward the outbound gates shortened Ukraine's remaining strike window. The second was moving through Russia's radar network. Above western Tatarstan, each radar sector the Lyutyi formation crossed gave Russian operators another chance to compare speed, direction, and spacing. For several minutes, the contacts still looked unrelated. Then one track remained stable for more than 20 seconds. One operator kept the track open instead of dismissing it as clutter. A second appeared behind it. Both were moving east. Both were holding nearly the same speed. Russian operators still had not confirmed an attack. But they no longer saw two random contacts. They saw the beginning of a formation. The Lyutyi drones still had more than 2 hours of flight ahead. At Alabuga, drivers were already climbing into the first KAMAZ trucks. The first outbound convoy was beginning to form. The outbound convoy forming inside Alabuga was not a surprise. Ukraine had been waiting for that pattern. Weeks before the Lyutyi drones crossed into Russia, Ukrainian analysts had stopped tracking individual Geran 2S and started watching the factory itself. Satellite imagery, thermal signatures, open-source videos, and logistics data were compared day after day, not to count drones, but to understand the rhythm producing them. Then that rhythm began to change. Storage areas that had emptied regularly started remaining full, while thermal imagery showed production halts operating deeper into the night. More KAMAZ trucks entered before dawn, but fewer left before sunrise. Twice, smaller outbound shipments formed near the loading area. Ukraine let them go. The trucks cleared the complex and disappeared onto separate roads. Inside Alabuga, the night shifts continued. Engines, guidance units, and unfinished airframes kept arriving, while completed drones accumulated near the outbound area instead of leaving immediately. Ukraine still did not strike. By the end of the next production cycle, the pattern was no longer difficult to read. Alabuga was building Geran 2s faster than it was moving them out. That was the change Ukraine needed. The smaller convoys had never been the real target. Destroying them might have removed several drones, but it would also have warned Russia before the larger concentration formed. Ukraine was waiting for assembly, testing, storage, and delivery to overlap inside the same complex. A Geran 2 destroyed over Ukraine could be replaced. A shipment lost on the road could be rebuilt. But a strike delivered during that overlap could damage the system producing the replacements. That was the target worth sending 12 Lyutyi drones more than 1,000 kilometers to reach. But the delay had produced a second consequence. As Alabuga filled, radar coverage around Tatarstan thickened. Air defense units shifted closer to likely approach routes, and operators who had once dismissed isolated contacts were now being told to compare speed, direction, and spacing. Ukraine had waited for Alabuga to expose its entire production cycle. Russia had used the same time to build a thicker wall around it. By the time the Lyutyi formation reached western Tatarstan, the first two stable tracks had already been handed east across multiple radar sectors. Alabuga was now less than 280 kilometers ahead. At their current speed, the 12 drones could reach the factory in roughly 90 minutes. Russia could no longer treat the contacts as harmless. Alabuga was protected by a layered regional network. S-400 batteries watched the wider airspace. Panzer S. One cruise covered the lower approaches near the complex. Pole 21 transmitters prepared to disrupt satellite navigation across likely flight paths. Russia knew Alabuga could be attacked. The problem was deciding what kind of attack was approaching. The 12 Lyutyi drones continued east along the western approach Russia was now tracking, holding similar speed and spacing long enough for operators to compare the returns. They were real strike aircraft carrying real warheads, but they were also forcing Russia to commit. For 47 seconds, the leading contact remained stable. That was enough. Commanders gave priority to the western sectors. Tracking stations updated the formation. Panzer crews moved into prepared positions. As additional returns filled the radar picture, Russian operators could finally see the formation as a coordinated strike. Then Pole 21 came online. Navigation errors began appearing across the group. Some drones drifted before correcting. Others adjusted their spacing as interference spread. The formation continued. Any Lyutyi that survived would still reach Alabuga. But every deviation forced Russian operators to update the track picture again. Radars stayed focused on the western approach. Missile crews waited for cleaner tracks. Electronic warfare operators increased power against the same visible threat. From Russian command posts, the situation looked clear. A coordinated strike was approaching. Russia had done what its defense network was designed to do. It detected the threat. It tracked the threat. It prepared to engage the threat. The mistake was assuming the visible threat was the entire operation. The 12 Lyutyi drones were the part Russia could see. Another strike element had already entered Russia days earlier. The second strike element had not crossed the Ukrainian border that morning. It had been positioned inside Russia days earlier, divided into ordinary-looking loads, and moved toward two concealed staging areas near Alabuga. 8 FPV strike drones were waiting. One group lay south of the complex, hidden among industrial service buildings. The second waited west of the factory near a rarely used access road. Their batteries remained disconnected. Their control systems stayed silent. From above, neither side appeared connected to an attack. While Russian radar operators concentrated on the 12 Lyutyi drones approaching from the west, the short-range drones were already inside the area the regional defense network was supposed to protect. The closest group was less than 6 kilometers from the factory. At full speed, it could reach the perimeter in under 3 minutes. That created a narrow launch window. Too early, and the nearby threat could be detected before Russian attention had fully shifted toward the Lyutyi formation. Too late, and Panzer crews could stabilize the western track picture and begin searching the low-altitude airspace around Alabuga. Ukraine waited until Pole 21 reached full power and the first Panzer crews committed their sensors toward the incoming formation. Then the nearby drones activated. The first drone lifted from the southern staging area. Seconds later, its camera showed the outer fence, loading area, and roofs of the main production buildings. The remaining drones followed from both directions. Panzer could still engage small targets at close range, but the system first had to find them against roads, trees, rooftops, vehicles, and industrial clutter. Operators then had to decide whether to keep tracking the long-range threats or turn sensors toward contacts already approaching the complex. That decision consumed the one resource Russia no longer had: time. The first low-altitude tracks appeared near Alabuga only after several drones were already within 2 kilometers of the complex. Radar crews shifted sectors. Panzer operators reassigned priorities. Tracking and engagement channels assigned to the western approach now had to be redirected toward threats appearing almost beneath the defenses. Russia had not failed to build a layered defense. Ukraine had forced that defense to solve 2 different problems at the same moment. The 12 Lyutyi drones were still carrying real warheads toward Alabuga. They were not disposable decoys. Any aircraft that survived would continue toward the factory. But their longer flight had pulled Russia's sensors, electronic warfare, and missile crews toward the threat approaching from outside the region. The first strike to reach Alabuga was now coming from inside the area those defenses had been built to protect. The question was no longer whether the nearby drones could reach Alabuga. It was which part of the production system they would strike first. The first FPV crossed the factory perimeter, while Panzer crews were still rebuilding the low-altitude picture around Alabuga. Its camera showed the obvious targets first: the administration block, the main gate, rows of parked trucks, large roofs that promised dramatic explosions. Ukraine ignored them. Within seconds, all 8 FPVs had entered the complex and begun splitting towards separate parts of the production system. Each carried a single warhead. Every decision had to count. The lead drone passed the office buildings and turned toward the storage area where completed Geran 2S were waiting for shipment. A second headed for final assembly. Its target was not the hall itself, but the specialized fixtures that held airframes in position while engines, electronics, and guidance systems were installed. One drone moved toward electronic testing. Another took the calibration section. 2 more split toward engine storage and the main electrical substation. The final pair approached backup power and the production control center. The objective was not to destroy the largest structures. It was to damage the equipment and connections that allowed work to pass from one stage to the next. A roof could be patched, a wall could be rebuilt. But a robotic fixture, testing rig or calibration bench had to be replaced, aligned, checked, and certified before the line could move normally again. Then the plan began to change. Smoke from the first impact drifted across the southern side of the complex, obscuring one drone's planned route toward the backup generators. Its signal weakened between 2 metal-sided buildings. Battery time was falling. The operator had only seconds to choose. continue through the smoke and risk losing the drone, or abandon the original target and strike the production control center now visible beyond the loading yard. The drone changed course. Another FPV never confirmed its final impact before the video feed disappeared. The attack was no longer unfolding exactly as planned. It did not need to. Completed Geran 2S could remain inside storage, but damaged testing and calibration equipment meant new airframes could not be cleared for shipment. Assembly workshops that survived still depended on engines, stable power, and production control systems now under attack. Each damaged stage slowed the next one. No single strike was expected to stop Alabuga by itself. Together, the strikes disrupted the sequence that turned separate components into completed drones. Ukraine was not trying to erase the factory in one morning. It was trying to create delays that would spread through every stage of production. The explosions lasted only minutes. The fires would eventually stop. The production delays would not. The next shipment trucks reached Alabuga after the attack. Drivers arrived expecting the usual loading cycle. Completed Geran 2S were already waiting inside storage. But the loading schedule had been suspended. The trucks remained outside while inspection teams waited for damaged testing and calibration systems to return online. That was the first visible sign that the damage had moved beyond the fire. The factory still had standing buildings. Power returned to several workshops. Production control systems began coming back online. But restoring individual sections did not restart the line. If testing remained blocked, completed airframes could not be approved. If approval stopped, final assembly slowed. As assembly slowed, temporary storage began to fill. Once storage filled, new engines, guidance units, and airframe components had nowhere to move. The disruption traveled backward through the system. Workers who had been assembling drones now had to inspect damaged equipment, clear debris, reroute power, and help restore production areas. Every hour spent recovering the factory was an hour not spent building the next shipment. Russia now faced a larger decision. It could repair Alabuga and attempt to restore the same concentrated production system. Or it could disperse more work across smaller facilities, reducing the risk of another single strike but making coordination, transport, testing, and final delivery more difficult. Either choice demanded additional resources. Specialized machinery had to be replaced. Production schedules had to be rewritten. Security around the complex would have to expand. More short-range air defense assets would likely be pulled toward Alabuga and other critical industrial sites. Personnel and equipment intended to increase output now had to protect and restore the capacity that already existed. Ukraine did not need to destroy every Geran after it reached the battlefield. It had attacked the point where engines, electronics, guidance systems, labor, and time became one finished weapon. The strike lasted only minutes, but each delayed inspection held back an airframe. Each blocked production stage pushed the next shipment further behind schedule. Each week spent restoring capacity meant fewer new drones available for future attacks. Ukraine had not been fighting the Gerans already in the air. It had been slowing the production of the Gerans that had not yet been built. That was the real target. The attack on Alabuga was never measured by how many drones exploded that morning. It was measured by how many could not be built afterward. Buildings could be repaired. Equipment could be replaced. By restoring a broken production rhythm required time Russia couldn't recover. Ukraine had not been trying to win one strike. It had been trying to shape every strike that came after it. A single drone destroyed over the battlefield could be replaced. But slowing the system that kept creating those drones changed the pressure on every future operation. That is the difference between destroying drones and attacking the system that keeps replacing them.